Hello and welcome to this presentation on writing for publication. I'm Rebecca Linssen, the Group Editorial Director of MA Healthcare. We publish a number of different titles for nurses and other healthcare professionals. This presentation will give you an overview of the process of writing for publication and how you might go about it. So why might you want to write an article? Is it a topic you feel strongly about? Is it because you've had some experiences, particularly maybe a case with a patient that you think might be helpful for other nurses to learn from? Is it because you had an excellent mark for your paper and your supervisor said you should try to get it published? Is it because you want to see your name in print? Is it because it would look good on your CV? Or is it because the editor has asked you to write on a particular topic? One thing to note, if your supervisor has said that you should, but you're not sure about writing, then think carefully about it. There's a lot of hard work involved. It's not just as simple as taking your paper, sending it to a journal and getting it published, as this presentation will now outline for you. So what will you write? If you want to start off with something small, you could look at maybe writing a letter to the editor about some content that's already been in the particular publication. You could see if a publication runs book reviews or reviews of TV programmes or things like that. Or if there's a particular publication you're interested in, you can see if they have what are called filler articles, which might be comment pieces or responses to things that are happening in the world which relate to that particular journal or topic. If you want to write a full article, important things to think about: write about something that interests you, write about what you know. So case studies that you've worked on, treatments or procedures that you understand, service developments that you've been involved in, research that you've been involved in, or a career profile about your work. That's something you could write about and you could communicate to others in your field. Set yourself a question to answer. What am I adding to the literature with this article? It's very important to think about who you're writing for. Who's your target audience? Are you writing for your peers? Are you writing for students? Are you writing for members of a different healthcare profession? That will dictate which journal you think you should be writing for. If you're writing for nurses, you might select the British Journal of Nursing. If you're wanting to write something for healthcare assistants, the British Journal of Healthcare Assistants, for example. Which journal you plan to target will influence the writing process, so it's important to think about this initially rather than writing your article and then deciding where you might want to try and publish it. Which journal you plan to target will affect the style of writing, will affect the structure of your article, and will affect the content of your article, because journals have different word counts, they have different article types and article lengths. It's important to remember that you can only submit a paper to one journal at a time in terms of publication ethics. You shouldn't submit to multiple journals because it's not fair on the peer reviewers if people are being asked to review the same paper for different journals. And an article should only be published in one journal at all. Otherwise, you have issues around something called duplicate publication, which is where it might appear that there's more research on one topic than there actually is because the same information is included in two or more papers. Remember that journals have different aims, different audiences and different requirements. Something you're writing for the British Journal of Nursing will be very different from a short comment piece you were writing for the Nursing Standard, for example. Who's your audience? What are the needs of that audience? Is it a high-level research audience? Is it an audience of student nurses? Think about this and make sure that you target the content that you're writing accordingly. Choosing a specific journal from the beginning makes it much easier for you to make sure that your article fits the requirements of that journal, which in turn will mean that you have a much higher chance of getting your article published. If you've already written this for a course assignment, how can you get it published? This is a question we as editors are asked frequently. Adapting existing writing isn't necessarily always as easy as you'd think it might be. You think, oh, well, I've written it all, I just need to tweak it a bit and send it into the journal. But it needs careful thought and planning. Sometimes it's actually easier to start from scratch with the information that you have rather than adapting work that you've already done. The reasons for this include that you're writing for a different audience, that the guidelines that you had to follow for your piece of coursework might be different from the journal's author guidelines. Journal articles might need a specific focus, whereas coursework might be a bit broader and look at lots of different themes. And also, importantly, have there been any developments since you first did your research? The time between starting an essay, having it submitted, getting your marks back, and then thinking, oh, actually, yes, this might be something that would be useful to get published. There may well have been changes, additions to the research in that field. So it's important when you submit your article to a journal that the literature that you're referencing is as up to date as possible. If you're not sure about whether your article is suitable, then contact the editor. That might sound daunting, but we're all humans. We're all passionate about our journals, and we're always interested to speak to new authors and to get content that is suitable for our readers. You should be able to easily find the contact details for the editor via the websites of any publications that you're interested in. Make sure you have the correct contact. If you're contacting the editor, have an idea of what you want to write and why you think it might fit that particular journal. So rather than just sending a very general email saying, I'm interested in writing an article on this topic, do you want it? If you can focus the email and say that I think it would be relevant for your journal because it meets these criteria or it's suitable for this audience, again, that makes it easier for the editor to see, oh yeah, that would be suitable for our journal, or, oh well, no, it wouldn't because the scope of our journal is different, but they can then direct you to a different journal. The editor should be able to tell you whether it's likely to fit the journal's requirements based on the proposal or an abstract, or they might want to see a fuller outline or a draft, or they might just tell you to submit. Editors won't guarantee you publication at this point, particularly for journals which have peer review processes, because they can't do that, but they can give you an indication if something might be suitable. If the editor says it isn't suitable, you've got two options. Do you want to target a different journal with this content, or do you want to write a different article for this journal? If you think the particular journal you've been in touch with is one that fits with the work you've been doing, maybe think about refocusing the topic or suggesting a different topic entirely. Editors will be happy to have these conversations with you. So next, formulate your outline, including your abstract. What's the question that you're hoping to answer with your article? What's already known? So this is based on the literature. If there isn't any literature in this area, or if there's limited literature, that's as important as there being lots and lots of published research, and it needs to be stated either way. Why does your question need to be answered? What are you adding to current knowledge? How might this change practice for nurses, healthcare professionals, whoever might be reading this article in their careers? Plan. This is really important. Make sure that you have a clear plan for your article and that it has a logical structure. If you're writing up research itself, then that can be easy. You've got a set structure for that we'll talk about later on. If you're writing a review article or a case study, make sure that the way that you cover the material flows sensibly. If you need to, get someone else to have a look at the structure and see if they think it makes sense. Draw up an overview of the points you want to make and how they fit together, and make sure you give sections and subheadings. Make it easy for your readers to follow the argument and to follow the discussion that you're having. So the structure of an article, as I already said, will be slightly determined by the type of article it is. The introduction gives you an overview to the content. It's not replaced by the abstract. The abstract should be able to be read on its own. And you don't have to cram all the background into this. You're just giving an overview of what you'll be talking about. In the body of the article, develop your argument, present the evidence, and also state where there isn't evidence. And as I said previously, if you're writing, for example, a research article, that will have a set format. So if you're writing up some research, you'll need to give the introduction, the methods, the results, and the discussion. Give a conclusion. Talk about what your investigation has shown. Talk about the implications for practice, in particular the readers of the journal that you've targeted with this, and areas for further research. Also, any limitations of your research or of your study. If there are areas that you're not able to draw conclusions from for whatever reasons, be explicit about that and explain why this is a limitation for this article. So in terms of your writing style, every journal has its own house style and conventions. For example, the way that the references are cited, whether it's a number in the text or whether it's the author's name and year in the text or whatever. Use straightforward language. Long words don't make an article sound more impressive, they actually make it harder to understand. Similarly, don't use jargon. If you're working in a specialist area and everybody uses abbreviations all the time, or they talk in a kind of a shorthand for that particular specialty, take a step back and think, if I wasn't working in this specialty, would I understand what this was saying? 9 times out of 10, the answer will be no. Or at the very least, people will have to think about what you've said. That makes it harder for them to understand the gist of your actual article. Abbreviations and measurements need to be explained. And your article should make sense to someone without them having to read everything on the reference list. So it should be clear enough, the points that you're trying to make. They shouldn't need to go and look at the research to understand what you're saying. Try and anticipate the reader's questions. This can be quite difficult because you're obviously more immersed in the area than they will be necessarily. But if you can take a step back, then maybe just think about, okay, have I clarified all the areas of this particular topic? Then editing your own work. This can be really tricky. What I would suggest is get your ideas down first, and then if you have time, take a break from the article and then go back to edit it. Refining and polishing your article takes as much time and needs as much attention as planning the article, so make sure you allow sufficient time for this. If you've got a deadline, either that the editor's given you or that you've given yourself, that if you have another project to move on to, make sure you include enough time in this for actually editing and refining the work. You'll spot problems better if you can come back to this with a fresh eye or ask someone else to read it. If you do that, be clear about what you're asking them to do. We'll have a look at this in a moment. When you're editing your own work, at this point, this is the time to be clear about what the instructions to authors and the requirements are for the particular journal that you're writing for. Check that the word count's correct, check the spelling, the punctuation, the grammar, and check it again. Because you've written this, you know what it says, but sometimes there might be a clearer way of phrasing something. Ask for feedback, but be clear on what you're asking for. Are you looking for feedback on style? Are you looking for feedback on wording? Are you looking for feedback on the format or other aspects of the content? Ask people specifically what you would like them to comment on. Give them reasonable time to do it. Don't ask them to do it overnight because you'll get a rushed response and it may not be as detailed as it could be and as helpful as it could be. If necessary, give them a copy of the instructions to authors for this particular journal so that they know what you're aiming for. And remember that you asked them for criticism, so try not to be too defensive if they do critique your article, but it's also up to you how to use this criticism. If you don't agree with what they've said, then you don't have to address it. You might be advised to think about it, but you don't have to follow that suggestion if you don't want to. So then you come to the process of submitting your article for peer review. Check the format that the journal requires. Does your document meet these requirements? A lot of journals will reject or return articles before they've even looked at them if they haven't met the requirements. The reason for this isn't just journals being picky because they can. If an article is being sent for peer review, then we're asking members of your profession or another profession to review this article, really to improve your article in their spare time. The very least we can do is provide them with something that's in a format that is easy for them to review. So if a journal asks for a separate title page, that's probably so that the manuscript can be sent anonymously for peer review. Please provide that. Check the font, if there's any requirements for the font size, the line spacing, pages to be numbered, if they ask for keywords, if they ask for key points, if they want tables and figures embedded in the document, or if they want them provided as separate files, and the format the references should be in. Make sure you also think about what else needs to be submitted. You might need a covering letter to the editor. You might need consent forms if you've had patient consent for inclusion in an article. You might need ethical approval for research. Make sure you know what the journal wants you to submit before you go and actually do the submission, so that when you go to the process of submitting, you've got all the information you need ready and you can just upload it and complete the process. Most journals ask you to submit articles online. Most manuscript review takes place online now. Usually these systems are fairly self-explanatory, but if there are areas you're not clear on, then do contact the editor, but try and contact them when you've actually started the process. You can say, this was the bit that I wasn't clear about. If there is something you're not clear about, take a screen grab and send it to them, because it's much easier for them to see what's happening and to advise you on how to complete that if necessary. Once you've submitted an article online, you should receive an email from the journal acknowledging the receipt of that article. If you don't get an email from them, the chances are the submission hasn't been completed fully. So then maybe just go back into the system and have a look and make sure that you've approved a final PDF or whatever the process might be. So then, once your article's been submitted, it will go through a peer review process for the majority of healthcare journals. This is often, but not always, double-blind. What that means is that the author is not aware of who the reviewers are, and the reviewers are not aware of who the authors are. This is intended to make it as neutral as possible, so that if the reviewer is from a competing institution, that they don't think, oh, well, that's someone from that institution, I won't accept their article. The reviewers make recommendations to the editor about the article and whether it should be accepted or rejected, or if revisions are needed, and the reasons why. They may suggest that revisions are needed to the article. So for articles from MA Healthcare, there are 4 different options for reviewers. They might accept the article. It's very rare for an article to be accepted unconditionally on the first review. So be aware of that when you're submitting an article. You're unlikely for the first response to be, brilliant, this is accepted. If it is, great, well done. But hold that expectation at the back of your mind. You might have the article accepted subject to minor revisions, in which case you can revise the article and resubmit it. You might have substantial revisions to make, which then it will come back and it'll need to go out for re-review. At that point, the article could still be rejected, so be aware of that. Revise and resubmit does not necessarily mean that an article will be accepted subject to those revisions being made. Hopefully it will, but it's not a guarantee. Or it might be rejected. Now, it's difficult to say don't take rejections personally, but if a topic has already been covered by the journal recently, if the reviewers feel that it might be more appropriate in a different publication, or if there are flaws with it, which hopefully, having gone through the previous processes, there won't be, then they might reject it. So the editor makes the decision based on the recommendations. So what do reviewers look for? As we've already mentioned, reviewers are doing this in their own time, they're unpaid, so it really helps for you to make it as easy as possible for them to look at your work and assess it. They'll look at the references. Are they up to date? Are they relevant? Are you missing any new pieces of research in this area? Does the article add something new to the body of knowledge? Is it relevant to the target audience? As we've already mentioned, this is important. If a journal is for healthcare assistants and you're writing a piece of work about nurses, it's probably not that relevant for the readership. Does the article have a sound theoretical, research or philosophical base? Is it well organised? Is it logically developed? Are the conclusions you're making justified from the data presented? This can be a major problem, and that's an important thing to think about when you're writing a research article. You've worked with this research for a long time. You know what it's showing you, but can you tell that from what you've actually put down in this paper? That's always an important thing to think about. Do you include further recommendations for practice and or for future research? Another thing to think about is plagiarism, which is an important concern for journals. Plagiarism you'll probably be familiar with from your studies. So plagiarism is where chunks of text have been copied from other articles. Now, this may or may not be intentional. If there's a very limited research base in a particular area, you may end up writing things which are very, very similar to other papers in the area. But it's an important thing to be aware of. There are different types of software that you can use, which you could run your paper through before you submitted it anywhere, which will just flag up if there are areas which you might have inadvertently copied or not rephrased or whatever. So be aware of that, because that again can be a big red flag for reviewers. If a paper looks an awful lot like another paper, they're immediately on the back foot and they're suspicious about it. So make sure that you've checked for that and ensure that your paper reflects your own work and opinions. So, as I said, the most likely outcome of the peer review process is that an article is sent back for revisions and amendments. As we said previously, people don't like criticism, but reviewers and editors usually have good reasons for suggesting changes, so try and be objective about it and think carefully about what they've asked. However, if there's a good reason why something shouldn't be changed, ultimately it's your article. If you feel that a reviewer has missed the point or that actually what you've said is justified, then you can discuss that with the editor and outline your reasons for not changing those. Remember, if you really don't want to make the changes, you can withdraw your article and submit it elsewhere, or just withdraw it fully. You don't have to continue with the review publication process with this if you don't want to. You might be slightly shooting yourself in the foot if you do that, but it is absolutely your prerogative. So when you've had your revisions and amendments and you've made the according changes to the article, It's good practice and helpful to the reviewers and the editor to outline the changes which you've made, or those which you haven't, in a cover letter which you send in with your resubmitted version. Again, as I said, reviewers are doing this in their free time. If you make it easy for them to say, oh, okay, right, well, I suggested 4 changes. Okay, so they've done that. Yes, I can see how they've addressed this change, and I can see how they've addressed that point. And, oh, okay, so that's why they didn't want to make that change. Yeah, okay, that's fair enough. And they've added something into the text to clarify that. It makes it much, much easier for the reviewer to then look at the article and go, oh yeah, great, they've done that, brilliant, accept it for publication. If you don't do this, they then have to trawl through the whole article, they have to trawl through the previous version of the article, they have to look through their comments, and they have to work out what you've changed. One of these is going to put the reviewer in a much more amenable state of mind towards your article than the other. So help them to accept your article by being very clear about what you've done and why you've done it. So hopefully at that point, you go through the revision and amendments process and your article will be accepted for publication. That's not the end of it though. Once you've had an accept letter, it's nearly there, but it's not completely. Articles will go through an editing process for the journal. So this is where the sub-editors will look at the grammar and spelling. They will make sure the text conforms to the house style. They're on the side of the reader, so they're trying to assess whether the meaning of the article can be clearly understood by the readers. As I said previously, you're very involved in the process of this article. You know what you're saying, you know the area. But if you're a reader who isn't a specialist in this area, can they understand what you've said? Sub-editors might suggest changes to phrasing, or they might query things and then rewrite the text accordingly so that it's clear for everybody. They may also pick up on minor issues which have been missed by the reviewers, so if there's some figures that don't quite add up or something like that. The sub-editors are there to improve your article. Try and work with them, try and help them. All they're trying to do is to make your article as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, so that it will be used, will be read, and will help to influence practice, which is really why you're writing and what you want it to do. So once you've gone through the editing process, your article will be published. Congratulations, you've made it. You've published an article in the healthcare literature. Congratulate yourself, tell your family, tell your friends, tell your colleagues, and then maybe start thinking about what you're going to write next. If you have any questions about anything regarding the publication process for any MA Healthcare titles, feel free to email me on this email address. The instructions to authors and advice for authors for all the MA Healthcare titles are accessible on the author guidelines link, and the submission links are also available from that page, or the submission details for BJN, British Journal of Nursing, are available on the last email. Thank you very much.